We do want to thank you for taking the time, and once again, appreciate your patience for joining Vandis's webinar with our partner, Arctic Wolf. At today's webinar, Chris Fielder, Arctic Wolf's Field CTO, will present the state of cybersecurity and trends. He is joined by Jonathan Rosinski, who will discuss how you can improve your cybersecurity coverage while also reducing costs. Joining Jonathan and Chris today is Vandis's cyber expert, Shahryar Khan, security engineer. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the window and we will address them as we go or at the end of the session. We also have a polling question today, and the polls will appear in the chat, so please have that open on the side of your screen. And lastly, as a quick reminder to visit our website, vandis.com/events, for a list of other upcoming events that you might be interested in. For those of you who are new to Vandis, we provide managed services and IT solutions to optimize the security and performance of network infrastructures on-premise and in the cloud. We design IT solutions to meet each organization's unique needs and goals. And for over 39 years, from mid-market to enterprise clients, Vandis has delivered comprehensive strategies for secure IT infrastructures. We have partnered with Arctic Wolf because the Arctic Wolf platform can give our clients access to 24/7 managed detection and response services that align to their business requirements. By attending today's webinar, you should walk away with an understanding of the different risks or entry points for cyber attacks and best practices for preventing, detecting, and mitigating cyber threats before the breach occurs. And now I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Joanne. As Joanne said, this is going to be a conversation pertaining to some of what you can do with regard to your organization's cybersecurity, information security posture, some steps you can take to be proactive, and just some information around, generally speaking, what threats we see as prevalent in the landscape from an Arctic Wolf perspective with our thousands of customers under monitoring 24/7, 365. So without further ado, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind progressing the slides here. So just to reiterate a little bit of what we intend to cover here, so some of the limitations of a tool-based approach, an approach that is based on narrow visibility. You'll understand why broad visibility is important, the ability to contextualize observations being paramount for early detection and prevention of cyber threats. Some of those best practices associated with that detection and mitigation, how to handle a large volume of cybersecurity telemetry coming from a number of different point solutions, what we call alert fatigue when you're dealing with hundreds of alerts per day, how to manage that on a 24/7, 365 continuous basis, and how to do all of that while reducing your costs and improving your insurability. Now, all that said, my portion of this is going to sort of lead into a little bit of the review of what we believe to be the 2022 year in review cyber threats trends analysis. And my colleague, Chris Fielder, will pick that up when we get to that portion of this presentation. Jeff, next slide, please. Thank you. So generally speaking, if you could populate this one out, Jeff, and just generally populate all the slides completely. Thank you. So generally speaking, when we're talking about the cyber threat landscape, this is an area where most enterprises, most organizations have seen an explosion in their attack surface. So just a preponderance of new devices, novel entry points, the collapse of the network perimeter, largely driven by the embracing of cloud procurement methodologies, SaaS services, but also as a result partially of the pandemic, a largely distributed workforce in the wake of that sort of limitation on people's ability to congregate in centralized locations has again given rise to a lot of BYOD, bringing your own device, people connecting from random locations, public Wi-Fi, their own hotspots, you name it, their own private networks. And all of those types of access methodologies introduce new threat vectors into the landscape. So, I think most cybersecurity leaders believe that their organizations are falling short when it comes to addressing cyber risk, and this is a big part of the reason, right? Generally speaking, the attack surface has expanded exponentially in the past few years, and this shows no signs of slowing down. Next slide, please, Jeff. So what are some of the real risks of compromise? Well, they are, manifold. There are a number of different things that can happen to your organization should you be compromised by a malicious threat actor. Some of these things include, what's referred to as business email compromise, when a threat actor gets into your email and is able to start, doing things like sending out false payment remittance notices or invoices, or exfiltrating of sensitive customer data. Email obviously being one of the primary means of communication for all of us these days. This is a sensitive area for a malicious actor to access. Ransomware, right? The classical encrypt in place. I'm going to lock up your data and sell you back the key, continues to be a very prevalent attack vector. Although with the increasing prevalence of offsite, immutable, rapidly recoverable backups, right? Snapshots, point-in-time recoverability, continuous availability, a lot of different ways of kind of skinning that cat. But ultimately, if you can restore your data from a good point in time, you don't need to pay to unlock that data, right? Now, we'll talk a little bit more about what that sort of capability and the rise of that capability in organizations has given rise to from a threat perspective. But before we get there, another more prevalent threat vector that we're seeing these days is simple destruction, right? Data deletion, wiper malware. This is very often directed against targets with the intention of creating as much disruption in the target environment and society as possible. Practically speaking, we're seeing more of these attacks in areas of geopolitical, kind of hotspots of geopolitical conflict. So thinking about areas where there's current, military operations taking place on the ground, destructive malware, wiping out industrial control systems, wiping out people's data entirely with no expectation of financial gain. That's becoming more prevalent in those locations. Now, data exfiltration, this is really becoming, some of the new hotness, I would say, in the area of the threat actors' desired outcomes. And this is because with the same level of access credentials that I can encrypt your data and lock it up, I can steal a copy. And so now the threat becomes, okay, well, hey, I'm not going to pay your ransom for decrypting the data. I can restore that from my backups, regardless of what backup vendor I'm using. And I'm sure Vandis can help you with, those policies, procedures, and technologies if you don't already have those. But even in the presence of an effective backup and recovery strategy, if I steal a copy of your secrets, the threat becomes, I'm going to disclose those on the public internet and your secrets won't be secret anymore. That can be a real risk to a lot of businesses, as we will see in a moment here. Jeff, next slide, please. So these are just some headlines I pulled in the past week or so for recent cyber attack events, some of the impacts of some of those events. So you may have heard of the attack on the LA Unified School District. I think it's the second largest school district in the country, educating hundreds of thousands of students and employing a very large number of folks. They were compromised late last year, and it only recently became apparent that among the data that was exfiltrated was student mental health records, and those have been disclosed on the public internet, on the dark web there on Tor. Suffolk County here on Long Island suffered a destructive cyber attack late last year, kind of put them back into the 1970s. They were doing everything by hand, paper invoices, paper checks, everything being done manually with fax machines. They were down for a while, and this really limited the county's ability to do the business of the people. Uber was breached. In this case, it was a social engineering attack coinciding with an MFA request. So they had some previously disclosed credentials out there, and they leveraged those to invoke an MFA request against the user, at the same time posing as a help desk agent, attempting to support that user, got that user to accept the MFA request they did not initiate. And from there, they were off to the races. They were in Slack, they were in OneDrive, they were in all of those SaaS locations. And it's notable because this attack never bypassed the network perimeter and never touched the endpoint. And so if you're looking at things, again, from a subset of the telemetry of the totality that is available within your environment, you may miss the forest for the trees at the critical moment. That's a great example of an attack that, if you're just looking at things from, say, the firewall perspective, from the network perspective, from the endpoint perspective, you're never going to see that, because that goes straight from MFA to SaaS. you've got LastPass. Obviously, you know, probably everybody's heard about this, but if you're a LastPass user and you haven't, you should probably go and update your master vault password, because the details of that breach just keep kind of becoming publicly disclosed, and it keeps getting a little bit worse. So if you are a LastPass user, recommend going in and resetting all your passwords, because that company was breached as well. And finally, you look at things like Moody's, you know, downgrading organizations when they suffer these destructive cyber attacks. You think about cyber insurance and will they pay out? You need to be checking certain boxes and making sure that you have certain capabilities, processes, policies, and procedures in place, not only to be insurable and to ensure that you have the best possible rate on that cyber insurance, but as we all know, insurance companies love to not pay out when the time comes. It makes it a very profitable business to be in. You got to make sure that if something does happen, they're going to be able to pay out on that policy as well. Did we have any questions so far? I think I may have seen somebody come off mute. All right. Jeff, next slide, please. Thank you. So here are just a few examples we're going to go through real quick of a few different data breach outcomes. So this is what it looks like when your data gets dumped to the public internet. So here's a construction company that was compromised, exfiltrated by the REvil ransomware group, typically Russia affiliated, I think is what's widely believed about them. And here you see some of their contracts, some of their blueprints, you know, some of the very sensitive intellectual property associated with this organization and their business. Next slide, please. Here's another engineering firm. In this case, you can see, you know, and this is by Clop, another prolific ransomware and exfiltration malicious threat actor group. And here you see some of their corporate officers' identification photos. Those are their passports. Yeah, that's really out there on the internet. This is truly the risk that we all face today. Next slide, please, Jeff. Another, in this case, a local municipality was compromised by the Avedon group. In this case, you know, police psychiatric evaluations, security camera, body camera footage, you know, all very sensitive information that I'm sure everybody would prefer to not be made public. Next slide, please, Jeff. And finally, you know, this law firm, again, was compromised by, you know, our old friends there, REvil. And in this case, they have a lot of high profile celebrity clients. Now, you know, speaking of an existential risk to your business, you know, if some of these litigation documents, some of these very private, very sensitive pieces of information are made public, as they were in this case, you know, you ask yourself, would our business survive that? You know, what kind of reputational risk do we face? And what does that represent to our ability, you know, to our ability to do business on a day-to-day basis? Is that an existential threat to us? There are many organizations, in fact, where the answer is yes. Good example is Lincoln College out of Illinois. You can look this one up. They suffered a destructive ransomware attack during registration season. And by the time they got their systems back online, well, students hadn't registered for classes and they couldn't make payroll. That organization, which had existed for over 100 years through multiple world wars, could not survive a destructive ransomware attack. Next slide, please, Jeff. So let's populate this one out. So what we see is that cybersecurity has an effectiveness problem, right? There's no lack of investment in many cases. Perfect, Jeff. In these tools and capabilities, right? You think of some breach like what Target or Uber suffered. These are organizations that had significant investment in security tooling, right? Now, the important thing to recognize is that tools can get beat, right? Any individual thing can get beat. This is why a credible cybersecurity defense posture is one of defense in depth. You can't put all your eggs in one basket in really anything, right? Ask any customer of Silicon Valley Bank, they'll tell you that. So what you need to do then is to look at your security posture in terms of, okay, you know, all right, so what are we trying to solve for? What portion of our attack surface are we looking at? Endpoint is great on the endpoint. If somebody's coming at me MFA and then straight to SaaS, straight to O365, straight to Slack, there's not much endpoint can do about that, right? So now, you know, all of these capabilities then are requisite to secure various portions of your environment, but top down, you need visibility across all of these and the ability to contextualize and correlate programmatically in real time, 24/7, 365 with human intelligence to monitor this, because as we know, watching ChatGPT, you know, automated processes can hallucinate, right? So you need the ability to kind of look at all of this in totality in real time and draw actionable, timely conclusions, the business intelligence that drives these positive security outcomes, that's the business that Arctic Wolf and Vandis are here to provide, to talk about with you today. That's the service we provide to our customers every day. Next slide, please, Jeff.
So just a quick question.
Sure.
What do you see from organizations right now? How are they managing to be proactive when it comes to these threats, and how is their security posture and strategy?
Sure, that's a great question, Shiriar. So, proactivity is important, and there are a number of different ways that you do that, right? So first off, you need to understand what you have out there. A comprehensive asset and vulnerability inventory, which Arctic Wolf provides to our managed risk service, is critical to understanding your threat landscape, understanding your attack surface, right? So you need to inventory your attack surface. You need to have a structured, proactive approach to security posture assessment and hardening on a continuous basis, right? Which we provide. That being said, a lot of organizations look to groups like the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, their Common Cybersecurity Framework, CSF 2.0, in fact, is currently in the public comment period. They're working to draft the new version of that policy. If you have any thoughts on that, you can go and chime in with NIST right now. But those are some, that's a framework, kind of an objective third party that a lot of organizations sort of hang their hat on. Obviously, there are a number of different compliances that a number of different organizations will need to hit, whether that's HIPAA, whether that's PCI, whether that's FIEC, whether that's NCUA. There are a number of different, frameworks that kind of implement, some of this oversight and the requirement for that continuous improvement of your security posture. Even something as simple as a cyber insurance due diligence process, right? They're going to hit you with a questionnaire. You're going to have to check a lot of boxes. If you don't check those boxes today, you're going to, have to go in and do that. Now, that being said, a lot of those things are somewhat reactive in nature, right? You're trying to comply with some set of requirements that are being foisted on you by some entity or process. I think NIST also says that the place you want to get to is one of continuous adaptation, continuous improvement, because, always sort of just trying to check the box, it's not really going to protect you against the novel 0-day that's coming out tomorrow. So you need to be proactive. And we have an approach we take called the security journey. I'll get into towards the end here, where we'll talk a little bit about Arctic Wolf's approach to that. But does that answer your question, Shiriar?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. So again, to reiterate, right, any individual tool can be beat. This slide, I think, does a really good job of illustrating that. So what you see on the screen, those little orange percentage signs next to each of these point solutions, next to each of these tool categories, indicate the percentage of the total number of ticketed incidents back to our customers. When we ticket an incident, we as an Arctic Wolf, that incident has been vetted by a human, it is actionable, timely, a true positive, right? So of the true positives we ticket back to our customers, you can see some percentage is originating in observations coming from every portion of your environment, right? So if you're looking at things just from, say, the firewall perspective, the network perspective, the endpoint perspective, you run the risk of missing the forest for the trees or not catching the needle in the haystack at the critical moment. So the service, then, the top-down visibility correlation across all of these sources that Arctic Wolf provides, I like to say we provide the needle without the haystack. Next slide, please, Jeff. So at this point, I will hand it to my colleague, Chris Fielder, who will take us through the 2022 year in review.
All right, thank you so much. So let me go ahead and try to share out my screen here. Let's make sure this works. Can let me know if you're able to see my slides.
Yep.
We can see it.
All right, and you see it in the slide view itself?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you for asking me to join this. So my name is Christopher Fielder. I am the field CTO here at Arctic Wolf, and I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years now. My background is primarily hands-on keyboard, as a security analyst, incident responder, threat hunter, all the fun things, before moving into more of a research type role that I'm in now, where I'm able to do both research and outreach. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today, is doing the research portion, digging into what is happening out there in the threat landscape and the cybersecurity landscape, and then the outreach, where we then take that information and pass it along to you. So this is coming out of us at Arctic Wolf saying, okay, well, we want to know what has happened in the cybersecurity landscape from the practitioner standpoint over the past 12 months. That way we can use that information to help drive, well, what we are going to do for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, but also what our customers and our clients and those that we speak with also can do for their environment to make sure that they know that they're on the right path, or where they really stand up to some of their colleagues that are out there as well. So giving some background on this research and this report, we've been doing this report for a few years now, but we said we want to go bigger. We want to get more information. Arctic Wolf is expanding globally, so we said we want to expand this report globally as well. So we reached out to 700 different IT leaders. We made sure that these were individuals that were doing this day to day. They are on the front line, and they are actual leaders in this field. So 48% of our respondents were C-level executives. 32% were directors or vice presidents, and 20% were owners, and those are owners of a product or owners of a program in cybersecurity. So we made sure that these were individuals that really can provide us with strong quality information and help us understand, well, what is going on out there? What are you seeing on a day-to-day basis? And, what are your thoughts in the area of cybersecurity? What's being done correctly? What can be changed? What can be modified? How can we improve? So let's go ahead and jump straight into this. I just want to say, one thing that I want to hit real quick here is that we did reach out to all these different geographic areas and made sure we got data. And the first interesting trend that I found when we got the data back and started digging through it is that, when we broke the data apart into the different geographic regions, there wasn't a big difference that was out there. We saw these trends happening on a global basis. So the trend that was happening, in the United States or in North America mirrored a trend that was happening in Europe or in Australia and New Zealand. And that's because of the way that we were asking these questions and what we were looking to find. If we were digging in on things like cyber insurance that was spoken about a few minutes ago, or if we were asking questions on compliance, we would get very different results based on the region we were asking. But when we were asking about things like, well, what are you concerned about? And, what threats really keep you up at night? And where do you think you could invest a little more money or time in your security practice? What we found is that pretty much across the globe, everyone is facing a lot of the same concerns and have a lot of the same opinions and thoughts and what's driving them. So all the research we're going to talk about today and the results are from a global perspective. So I just want to point that out first. And the first thing I'll say is cloud was the dominant theme of our research, and cloud was the dominant theme of the data that we got back. So a lot of the questions that we asked weren't even about cloud. But what we got back were people talking about cloud. They were really concerned about cloud security. So 53% of those that we spoke with stated they currently have plans to add or upgrade their cloud security technology within the upcoming calendar year. Last year when we did this report, we found a very interesting statistic as well. We found that 99% of organizations are using some form of public or private cloud. That is a Gartner stat. 99% are using some form of public or private cloud. But what we found was that only 18% of organizations are actively monitoring and securing their cloud resources. So using cloud security posture management or active cloud monitoring, only 18%. So that leaves, 81% of organizations that are not actively securing their cloud infrastructure. That was a major security gap and a major security concern from what we saw. So we spent the next year going out and talking to individuals and saying, hey, cloud security is a major concern, and less than 20% are out there actively securing their cloud. We really need to step up, and try and fix this. And I don't think we can take all the credit for it, but I do like to think that we did move the needle here and trying to get people to really buy into the idea that, okay, we need to invest in cloud security. This is actually a 31% increase from what we saw last year. So a 31% increase of organizations that are saying, I plan in the next year to invest heavily in cloud security. And we want to see this continue to increase. 42% of respondents stated that cloud security gaps were their primary area of worry. So we ask them, okay, imagine this. We come to you and say, there is a threat actor, call it, quote, hacker, that is trying to get to your organization. You are their target. You're in their crosshairs. Where are you most concerned? What is going to keep you up at night? And almost half, 42%, said their cloud security gaps. That's their primary area of worry. So that's quite a bit. They're saying, okay, if I'm going to get compromised, I think it's going to be cloud, how they're going to do it. 38% of respondents believe they are effectively securing their cloud resources. But I'm going to flip that and say, okay, 38% believe that they are, but that leaves what? 62% of respondents that do not believe they are effectively securing their cloud. So only 38% of organizations that are out there believe they are effectively securing their cloud capabilities. That is a pretty low percentage. We would like to see that a lot higher. And 46% of respondents believe that they would like to learn more about cloud security and evolving infrastructures. We said, what do you want to learn about the most in the next year? Almost half, 46%, said, we want to learn about cloud. We want to learn about how to secure it. We want to learn about how we utilize it. We just want to know really about cloud security. So that was a pretty interesting trend that we saw across the board. And we think cloud is going to be one of the main concerns for the next few years. This next trend is on technology. This was a pretty provocative question that we asked, but we wanted to know what people thought. And we said, where do you see the least value currently in your technology stack? So, in context, we're talking about the technology for security that you've invested in. Where are you seeing the least value when it compares to how much you've invested, how it was sold to you, and your expectations, right? So put that into context. How much you spent for it, what you expected to get out of it, how you expected to use it. Where do you see the least value? 30% of organizations stated it was their endpoint technology tool that's providing the least value. We were really surprised by this. 30%, the number one answer, was their endpoint tool. And this surprised me because I know that there's a lot of emphasis on endpoint, right? There are vendors that are out there that have been pushing for years now that endpoint security is all that matters. Endpoint security is security. You can't have a security program without endpoint security. I think there's a lot of truth to that, but it may have been oversold. So we went back and did some research into this, and we want to say, okay, we spoke with respondents, we spoke with colleagues, we reached out to individuals that would know about this, and anecdotally we got a few results when we said, well, why is this the result? There's a few reasons here. One, current endpoint tool may not be a good fit. The endpoint tool that they are using may not be right for their environment, because when we say, quote, endpoint tool, that's a range of different technologies. That could be EDR, that could be EPP, that's an endpoint protection platform. It could be legacy or traditional antivirus. It could be next generation antivirus. There's a lot of different endpoint tools. And an organization may have invested in one that is not right for them. Maybe they invested in one that's primarily detection based, but they wanted something that was, rooted in prevention. Or flip side, maybe they got a lot of prevention capabilities, but they wanted more visibility. They wanted that more EDR approach. So they didn't get what they wanted. Or this next point, maybe they invested in a very strong, robust, detailed, advanced endpoint tool, but they don't have the people or the resources to use it correctly, right? Because I could go out and buy the most, expensive, top-of-the-line guitar, and I could buy the best amp that's out there, and I could buy all the different pedals, but if I don't know how to play, it doesn't matter. I just kind of wasted my money, right? In the same way, I could go out and buy the best endpoint tool on the market that does all these different cool features and capabilities. But if I don't have the people that know how to use it correctly, then I've invested incorrectly in my environment. And finally, only a single piece of the visibility puzzle. Organizations may have spent almost their entire security budget on an endpoint tool, invested in it, and then went, well, it works, but all I'm seeing is the endpoint data. And if I'm not fully deployed 100% to every endpoint in my environment, I've got security gaps. I'm not seeing the network. I'm not seeing the different log sources. I'm not looking at the cloud resources in the perimeter, right? We need to take it all into context and look at it all together. So it's weighted too far on the endpoint side in some situations. So we thought this is a really interesting result here. Awareness initiatives and understanding how to stop attacks at the earliest stages. Again, my background primarily was hands-on keyboard as a security practitioner, and I know how much it stinks to spend so much time and effort investing in protecting your environment, right? And monitoring it as much as you can and really putting that blood, sweat, and tears into securing your environment, only to get a call on the weekend because you've been breached because somebody, in the office or in customer service, wherever, gave away a password from a social engineering attack, or they were phished and they didn't know any better. It really stinks when that happens. So we need to educate our people, and more organizations are catching on to this. 24% of respondents listed building a culture of security awareness as an urgent concern driving their cybersecurity strategy. They said, almost a quarter said that over the next year, one of my main concerns driving my strategy is I need to invest in security awareness. 40% of respondents stated they are actively planning to implement a security awareness program within the coming year. This is a good stat we think helps people that need to justify their position, because 40% are actively going to implement a security awareness program in the next year. Add to that the number of organizations that already have a security awareness program, right? So that number is at least going to double there. So that's probably 80% that have or are going to create a security awareness program. And if you and your organization does not have one, then it may be time to justify to your board of directors or your managers or whoever is in charge and say, hey, we need to get in front of this. We need to educate our people on the fact that they are targets before we are really just wasting money on our security program because it could be compromised by, a non-technology attack. So social engineering or phishing or an unfortunate situation like that. Ransomware. This was an interesting threat because, we asked about different attack vectors. We asked about things like business email compromise. We asked about, vulnerabilities and exploitation. Ransomware was the ultimate threat that everyone was concerned about. So it didn't matter how they got through the door. What mattered to people was what they did once they were in the building, and that is ransomware. Ransomware is the primary concern and threat that they are concerned about, which makes sense. So we asked, what are the top attack vectors you're concerned about? 48% said ransomware first and foremost. Another interesting trend, 42% of organizations that we surveyed suffered a ransomware attack in 2022. 42%. These were organizations that had strong security programs. They had security leaders. They had people that were dedicated to monitoring and responding to threats full time. And still, 42% suffered a ransomware attack in the last year, with another 3% saying they weren't sure. And if you're wondering, how are you not sure if you suffered a ransomware attack? These organizations spotted the threat early and responded to it before it got to the level of detonating a payload or actually becoming ransomware. So they stopped a breach, they stopped a compromise that could have led to ransomware. I think it's safe to say more than likely those were probably going to detonate some sort of ransomware, just playing the odds there, the statistically saying that most attacks involve some form of ransomware. So 42% to maybe 45% suffered a form of ransomware attack in the last year. That is a very high number. And then we really honed in on that and said, okay, we want to talk to the people that did suffer a ransomware attack. And those of you that did suffer a ransomware attack in the last year, did you pay? Did you pay? Because we want to know what is driving the fact that these ransomware attacks continue to increase. And we got a pretty interesting range that was in here. 26% of organizations took the hardline approach of saying, we will not pay. And I respect that. I understand it. That is the FBI stance. We work with the FBI once in a while and they say, our recommendation or our firm stance is do not pay, do not negotiate, do not pay. And I understand that. I also understand being on the other side of that, and you are a victim of ransomware, and time is money, and you are getting, right, you're just hemorrhaging money because you're down, your organization is suffering, you're not making money, people's lives and their livelihoods are at stake, so you got to do something. So that's why we saw these other numbers. 11% chose not to pay, but they allowed somebody to pay on their behalf, whether that's an insurance company or somebody they have a warranty under or a representing body. 11% had somebody pay for them. 41%, the largest number in here, chose to pay the ransom in full. And another 22% paid a portion of it that they negotiated down. Not everybody knows that that's a possibility, but it is. Almost every time you are able to negotiate the ransom down. People just don't know that you can do that. That's why, at Arctic Wolf, we have our Arctic Wolf Incident Response Team, where we actually employ experts in this area that are full-time ransomware negotiators. Because we say, we understand not paying, and if you say you don't want to pay, we will back you up on that. But if you have to pay, at least don't pay sticker price. Don't pay the full amount if you don't have to. Negotiate it down. And it's not unheard of to go negotiate it down to maybe even under 20% of the initial asking amount, because these ransomware attackers just want to make something. You got to think they did very little work here. They just want to make some money. And when we look at these results as well, when we add them together, why is ransomware continuing to be a threat? Why is it going to continue to be a problem? Because 74% of the time, they are making money off these attacks. Only 26% of the time are they not getting paid. The other 74% of the time, they are getting paid something. And again, they're not putting in a whole lot of effort. They're opportunistic. They're seeing an organization that has a weakness. They are deploying within that organization. The ransomware is executing, and then they sit back and wait to collect money. So that's why these are going to continue to grow. Breaches. Will you suffer a breach in the future? Well, we have to look at the past. In the past year, 50% of organizations admitted to suffering a breach within the last year. 50%. I think this is an interesting trend because I'm going to explain this. 50% admitted to suffering a breach within the last year. Does that mean 50% did not suffer a breach? No, that's not what that means. That means that 50% identified and acknowledged that they suffered a breach. The other 50% may not have suffered a breach, or what's more likely is they did suffer a breach and didn't see it, didn't find it, or don't want to admit to it. So it's interesting the way that this is worded, and we need to read between the lines here. So 50% said, yes, we were breached and we will admit to that. The other 50% are either saying we were not breached, we didn't find it, or we're not going to tell you if we were. So that's an interesting trend in and of itself. 72% of respondents that admitted to suffering a breach to us chose not to publicly disclose this information. The way that we worded this, we said, outside of those that you are legally obligated to report the breach to, so shareholders, board of directors, a law enforcement organization if you have to, anyone else, the public, your employees, upper management, did you notify them you suffered a breach? Did you notify anybody outside of those that you were legally obligated to that you suffered a breach? And 72% of the time, the answer is no. We only notified those that we were legally obligated to notify. That's an interesting trend. I hope, personally, I don't want to get too high on a soapbox here, but I'm hoping that this changes in the future. I think the only way that we as a security collective are going to overcome a lot of these threats and problems is if we continue to share information. We need to get rid of the stigma that because of you suffered a breach that you're at fault or you're not doing your job or there's a problem. That's not the case. These are strong organizations. They're putting a lot of effort into securing their organization and they were still breached. It's going to happen because you as a security analyst are tasked with securing the vast array of all the devices in your organization. It is a large-scale job, but an attacker only needs to find one weakness. So it is, you really branching out, protecting everything, and they just got to find that one weakness to breach you. So it's always going to be stacked in their favor. So it's not about where you breached, but it's about how did you respond to it? Did you identify it quickly? Did you prevent it from becoming a larger concern? Did you stop it? Were you one of those people that says, I don't know if I suffered ransomware because I stopped the attack before it got to that point? That is what we should brag about. Not, were you breached or were you not breached? Because, hey, you're probably going to get breached. But did you find it? Did you stop it? Did you prevent it from escalating? Can you tell us more about it? And share that information. Again, as a collective, we need to share that information because anything you were compromised with, you can use that data to inoculate the rest of us. Tell us what you found. Share those indicators of compromise. Make it so that that attacker can't use that same methodology and that same ability for the next person, because that next person is going to be watching those areas. So again, don't want to get on my soapbox there, but I really think this trend shows that we've got a lot of improvement as a security community here that we need to do. We need to be more open and share this information more. Budgets. Budgets are ever expanding. They're going to continue to expand. 57% of organizations said that they plan to increase their budget in the next year. And you go, okay, only 57%. Put it into the context of what's happening, not just in the United States and, North America, but globally. There's a lot of economic problems in the world right now, just in the United States, right? So it's a down economy, depending upon how you look at it. Different people have different opinions, but, on what's going on with the economy. But I think we could all agree that a lot of organizations are suffering out there. They are reducing their budget. They're tightening their belts. So in an economy like that, where organizations are saying, I need to maximize my profits, I need to minimize my spend, I need to reduce budget, to have over half of organizations saying, I'm reducing my budget, but I'm increasing my budget in cybersecurity, that tells you how important this is. 15% acknowledge that they plan to increase their budget by over 50% over the previous year. So they're investing even heavier in cybersecurity. So again, compare yourself to your colleagues that are out there. And if you're being tasked with reducing your cybersecurity budget, you're really at a disadvantage when most organizations are either staying the same or increasing their budget. Sorry about that. So what I would say to those organizations that are planning on decreasing their budget is please cut your budget with caution. Do everything you can to try and talk people out of it. At least stay within the budget that you have if possible, because you need to weigh the cost of a breach versus the cost of your budget. You may save a few dollars up front by cutting areas of your budget, but if you're breached, how much is that going to cost you? It is a very tough situation to stand in front of a board of directors and say, yes, I saved us $10,000 on our budget, but because of those $10,000 that I saved, the areas that I cut, we were compromised. We had to pay a ransom of $50,000, and then we had to pay an incident response team of, $25,000, and in total, we saved $10,000, but we actually ended up spending almost $100,000. It's a very difficult conversation to have. It's very short-sighted. So make that case. Do what you can. Prevention is always going to be cheaper than recovery. I think we all know that. And remember that drastic cuts are a temporary solution to a long-term problem. Look for opportunities to maximize your investment. Look at where you've invested currently. Are there ways that you could increase the capabilities of what you currently have? Are you using your tools to their full potential? Are you using their people to their full potential? I've seen a lot of organizations that have their people very siloed. They say, okay, I've got these two people are my endpoint team. These two people are my SIM team. I've got one person that is my incident responder, one person that is my code analysis and my secure developer. Okay, cool. I'm glad you have all those people. I'm glad they have their area of expertise. Now they need to cross-train. Now they need to understand each other's job. Now they need to share the load. That way, if one person is unavailable, you're not out a person really, right? If one person's unavailable, you have others that can step in and do what they need to. So stop siloing your people. Have them cross-train. Maximize your investment. Now, don't overwhelm them. Sell it to them from the point of view of, I want to increase your knowledge. I want to invest in you and invest in your ability to increase your understanding of security. I want to get you out of this silo that you're in, right? And if you pitch it that way, a lot of analysts, I know I was in that position where I said, absolutely, I want to learn about these other areas. I want to increase my skill set from a selfish standpoint because that makes me more marketable. So again, I'll get off my soapbox there, but security skill shortage is going to be a perennial concern. When we asked organizations, why are you making these decisions? Why did you invest in this area? Why did you create this policy? The answer always was rooted in the skills gap or the shortage of people. I invested in that tool because I don't have enough people, so I needed something that could fill the gap. Or I chose that policy because I don't have enough people and I needed to, do it this way. Or I invested in a MDR because I don't have enough people. Again, it was always rooted in the lack of individuals that are out there. We found that 68% of organizations identified staffing-related issues as the #1 threat to achieving their security objective. Why can't you meet your goals? 68% of the time, because of people. 32% said they're having difficulty hiring or retaining staff. They either can't get people in the door, or once they're in the door, they look for another job, something that pays more money, somewhere else that they want to go to. This is across the board. It's happening all the time. I'm talking to people all the time. They're having this problem. 36% of organizations feel the current staff lacks the necessary expertise needed for their goals. This one really kind of concerns me here. I don't want to harp too deeply on this one, but let me just say my concern here is that what I'm seeing is organizations going out there and saying, all right, I have a job posting that I want to hire somebody for. I want this person to have 15 to 20 years of experience. I want them to have a master's degree. I want them to be an expert in endpoint, an expert in SIM, an expert in network analysis, an expert in secure coding, an expert in incident response. I want them to be an expert in all these areas. I want them to work 6 days a week. I want them to cover night shift. I want them to really do everything. And I want them to do it all for $50,000 a year, right? That's an impossible job posting to fill. Nobody is going to do that job. And if you find this 1 in a million person, they are not going to do it for the amount that you're willing to pay. And so then they go, okay, well, I can't find anyone qualified to do this job. So, I did find a person that doesn't have any of those qualifications, but they're willing to work. So I'm looking for a person with 20 years of experience, and I got a person that has 2 months of experience. And what happens? They hire that person, but they put them in that senior position. They put them in charge of all these areas. They say, you are responsible for our security, and the security of our organization rests on your shoulders. We're paying you, right? So you need to take care of it. And they overwhelm that person, and they set that person up for failure. And I'm seeing this far too often. And then that person gets overwhelmed. They know eventually they're going to get breached and it's going to fall on them. So what happens? They learn a little bit and then they go to another job. And this company is stuck going, well, now I need to hire somebody else. So please don't get caught in that trap. Hire people for the job they will be successful in. Don't set them up for failure. It's better to hire 2 people that are junior than 1 person that is a little more senior but can't fill that position. Because the 2 junior people can work together. They can help each other improve. They can work off of each other, right? So for the same amount, you can invest in those areas and invest in those people. I'm saying invest in your people. Build that culture of them wanting to stay and investing in them and learning and, really developing their skill set so they'll want to stay with you. Instead of just saying, I'm paying you, it all rests on you. If we fail, it's your fault. Because that's how people are going to then jump and find another position that they like. So again, just a problem I'm seeing in the industry. And it's not every organization, but I'm seeing it far too common. 5 or more. 56% of organizations saying they need 5 or more full-time staff members. 48% are saying they need 10 or more full-time security staff members. I'm seeing organizations saying, I'm having a hard time filling 1 position. And yet I've got 10 job recs open. It's a really tough spot right now. So is there a solution to this? Again, maybe in the future. I think we all need to invest in building more people up, pushing, individuals across the board to go into cybersecurity. And in the meantime, there's great services that are out there. I know I'm speaking from a, a skewed point of view from Arctic Wolf and Vandis that's on right now, but I think that we all provide great services and can fill a lot of those gaps. So in summary, before I turn it back over here, cloud adoption is only going to continue to increase. Cloud is not going away. So make sure you're pivoting your security to a cloud-first approach. Global threats, increased payouts, and easier implementation means ransomware is going to be a long-term threat. Until we as a security community can get together and say we are not going to pay, which is not going to happen for a long time, this is going to keep being a problem. As long as attackers can make money here, we're going to keep seeing ransomware. So we need to plan accordingly. We need to detect as quickly as we can. We need to, again, plan to, if you are going to pay, pay as little as you can. Vulnerabilities are a common first step towards devastating breaches. So make sure you plan to monitor and address unknown vulnerabilities. A lot of organizations say that patching is one of their big areas of concern. I'm not saying you need to run out there and patch every system as soon as you can, because that could lead to problems as well. But there's no reason you shouldn't be monitoring a device that has a vulnerability that you know of that could be exploited. So make sure you're monitoring these known vulnerabilities. And the security skills gap will continue to remain a concern. So nurture your team, budget wisely, and consider outside help and services when needed. If you want to read about these trends or any additional trends we have, please check out the 2023 State of Cybersecurity Trends Report. You can find that at arcticwolf.com/the State of Cybersecurity Trends 2023. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jonathan here. And unfortunately, I think that is my time.
Thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate that. Some really helpful insight there and valuable context from peers across the industry. So thanks again. Jeff, if we can just jump right back into where we left off. I believe that is, I'll tell you, slide number 20.
All right, you bet.
You were on slide 20. The slides have now disappeared. They were there a minute ago.
All right, here we go.
Excellent. All right. So picking up where we left off, I know we're coming up on time, so I'm going to fly through some of this here. So Jeff, please, next slide. So first of all, how do we reduce our risk? How do we reduce our premiums? How do we reduce our costs while improving our security posture? First of all, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. So invest in good protection proactively, right? You'd rather not have to call in an incident response firm on an hourly basis. So you'll be much better off proactively assessing and hardening your security posture and ensuring that you've got a defense in-depth approach in place. Next slide, please, Jeff. So some of these insurance company controls that they look for, Arctic Wolf helps with or provides oversight and monitoring of. So you can see on the screen some of these mechanisms that Arctic Wolf provides: oversight, policy review, assistance with, and then some other things where those boxes are fully checked. Arctic Wolf can and Vandis together can offer these services as a whole solution, right, without any additional work required, really, from a significant time investment on the end user's side. So, these are the kinds of things that insurance companies are looking for, right? They want to make sure you're using MFA. They want to make sure that you're leveraging your backups. They want to make sure, to Chris's point, that you have a complete view of the asset and vulnerability inventory on a continuous basis, for those accepted vulnerabilities that you aren't going to remediate or patch right away, that you are monitoring those things. So, these are some of the services that we provide. Next slide, please, Jeff. And let's just before we get any further in here, I'd like to throw a question out there to the audience. How much time per week are you taking or per day are you taking just sifting through alerts from a security perspective? Or how much time is your team taking?
And just a reminder, it appears in your chat if you want to answer the poll.
Okay. See a couple of answers coming in so far. So one person has said up to half their time is spent just combing through alerts. Another person is saying it's too hard to estimate. So I'm guessing that means it's not a trivial investment of time. Anybody else feel free to provide your responses there. But, I think those two responses are a pretty good indicator of where we as an industry stand, right? It's either very hard to know how much time you're taking, or you're spending a fair amount of time. For the one person who said less than 10%, good on you. You're probably the outlier. A lot of folks take more time than that, or teams are required to take more time than that. Next slide, please, Jeff. So to give you an idea of how Arctic Wolf and Vandis approach this type of a problem, here's an example organization, right? 750 users, about 100 servers, 200 million log lines per week, observations as we refer to them, right? 200 million discrete log objects coming from across the environment, all of the sources, cloud, on-prem, endpoint, network, you name it, right? And so of those, the Arctic Wolf service, MDR service delivery approach, we filter those down, our platform does, those 200 million observations to 400 investigations performed by our team on a proactive basis. Essentially the platform ML process ascertaining which of these interesting events require human attention. And of those 400 weekly investigations, our triage team ticket out to the customer in this example 1 or 2 incidents on average per week. So those are actionable, timely business intelligence. The context of these tickets include what we're seeing, how we know, the steps you need to take in real time to stop this activity before any damage is done, and the steps to take on an ongoing proactive basis to stop this type of an attack before it starts next time. So 200 million down to 1 or 2. 200 million is the haystack. 1 or 2 is the needle. Actionable, timely business intelligence. The service outcome of our managed detection and response service is that needle without the haystack. Next slide, please, Jeff. And a little bit more about, just the cost of doing some of this in-house. As you probably know, security engineers and analysts make pretty good money in New York. If you were to try to build out a credible 24/7 SOC practice in-house, you need a pretty significant budget to do it. As Chris said, a lot of organizations are going to stand pat on their budgets or increase them. But even so, 8 to 12 individuals are required for a 24/7, 365 operation, according to Gartner. And you can do the math. That gets into prohibitive cost very quickly, just on the people, the onboarding, the training, the retention, the benefits, to say nothing of the tooling that they have to use. So if you want to reduce your costs and increase your coverage, look, one way of doing that rather than building these capabilities in-house is to look to best-in-class partners to form relationships with partners like Vandis, partners like Arctic Wolf, who have built these practices and can kind of give you what you need when you need it without all of the overhead. Next slide, please, Jeff. So a little bit more about our service approach, how we structure the interactions and the teams and the service itself. Essentially, we break out the teams that our customers interact with into kind of 2 categories: the dedicated named security resources who are available on a continuous, unlimited basis for strategic posture assessment and hardening guidance. That's the concierge security team. And then the tactical team, the 24/7, 365, eyes on glass, always watching, always monitoring, responding proactively, filtering out all the noise, also all the false positives, just giving you that needle without the haystack. That's the triage team. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here. Next slide, please, Jeff. So the triage team, again, filtering out all the noise, all the false positives, the needle without the haystack, actionable, timely business intelligence, continuous monitoring, continuous visibility across your entire estate, not simply on-prem, not simply cloud, not network, not this or that, but correlation across all of these telemetry sources, which is important in emerging threat vectors where you start to see, hey, if we were just looking at PowerShell execution on the endpoint, or if we were just looking at rule modifications in O365, those things taken in isolation might not be indicative of malicious activity. But when we correlate that to, login volumes and failed login attempts and behaviors indicative of password spray attempts, or login attempts coming from parts of the world we don't do business in, maybe Eastern Europe or various geopolitical nation states that may have malicious intent, you can start to get, through that contextualization, actionable, timely business intelligence that's going to protect your organization. Next slide, please, Jeff. The concierge security team. So this idea of continuous assessment and continuous, proactive, strategic security posture hardening guidance and partnership, that is 100% in scope with what the concierge security team does. They are available to you on an unlimited basis, any frequency, duration, or subject matter you care to engage with them on, and they have a proactive cadence, a structured approach to security posture assessment and hardening that they take with you, and that is the security journey. We'll talk more about in a moment. Next slide, please, Jeff. So the security journey essentially, is again a structured approach whereby your CST, your concierge security team, is going to dive deeply with you into vendor agnostic, industry standard best practices across any portion of your estate. It's worth noting we are not tech stack dependent. We don't care what vendors you're using. We're not trying to stick you into one walled garden or another. We sit on top of whatever your existing IT stack is, whatever existing investments you've made. We're going to layer on top of those and allow you to derive additional security value from those. Next slide, please, Jeff. And so this is kind of an idea of what that security journey looks like. These security posture in-depth reviews, or spiders, as you see at the bottom of the screen, that's a subset, just a sampling of a few of those. They kind of map back to that 5-pillar approach from NIST: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so these security posture in-depth reviews, again, are vendor agnostic best practice deep dives, industry standard best practices across some aspect of your environment or another. And the content and sequence of these is going to be entirely dependent on what exists within your environment. We're not going to take you through a cloud spider or a SaaS or an O365 or an AWS spider if you have no cloud footprint. And likewise, we're not going to take you through an Active Directory spider if you're using Okta for authentication. But these are industry standard best practices, the vendor agnostic. These are things like, are you using MFA? Do you have geofencing set up? Are you leveraging a least privilege access management procedure? How are you implementing those things? Have you tested your backups? What is your policy? What is your procedure? What is the process? And are they up to industry standard best practices? So there's a library of these spiders we maintain internally, over 100 of them, and an area of continuous collaboration within Arctic Wolf to continuously define, refine, and maintain these best practices, and ultimately leverage them to harden your security posture. Next slide, please, Jeff. So that's a lot of information, right? What do we do now? What if you take nothing else away from this this session? What should you be taking away? Well, what are your next best steps to harden your posture? A lot of this is pretty basic stuff, right? Consider your proactive strategy, right? If you go back, Jeff, one slide. Thank you. Perfect. So consider what you're doing on a continuous, ongoing, proactive basis. Don't wait until the boom, right? You want to be doing these things ahead of time. You want to be continuously assessing and hardening your posture, both from a process, procedure, people perspective, as well as from an asset and vulnerability perspective. If this seems like a lot to wrap your arms around, we are here to help. Vandis is here to help. Your best partners will be there to take you through this whole process. Again, asset and vulnerability inventory, bonus if that's continuous and not something that's done once in a while, right? And I will note here, a pen test is not a substitute for continuous vulnerability scanning and assessment and hardening. One kind of tells you, hey, how are you going to get in? The other is going to give you a holistic view to harden that entire attack surface. The latter is very important. Least privileged access, right? If users don't have a compelling business need to be executing PowerShell scripts, modifying system configuration settings, they probably shouldn't be able to. Assess your visibility, test your escalation remediation processes, test your backup and restoration workflows. If you don't have visibility, if you don't have correlation capability across these disparate telemetry sources, if your processes are not as effective in practice as you imagine that they might be, it's important to test those things to figure that out. So look to remediate that condition, again, with the assistance of your security partners, such as Vandis and Arctic Wolf. The basics, the blocking and tackling, make sure you're using MFA, make sure you're patching, you're aware of your vulnerability estate, you're applying your patches and your firmware updates and your OS patches and application patches regularly. Make sure you're backing up, make sure you're testing your restoration workflows, make sure you're using a change control process so that you're not inadvertently introducing additional vulnerabilities into your environment. as Chris said, user awareness, right? I often say you can build the most secure system in human history, and as soon as you sit a person in front of it, you've introduced a glaring security flaw. So make sure that your people are aware, build that culture of security awareness. Security is not a nice to have, it's not an afterthought, it is something we live and breathe every day. And with the preponderance of kind of scam texts I'm sure we're all getting, you know why this has to be top of mind for all of us. And if you've never been to haveibeenpwned.com, check it out. You probably have credentials that are out there in the wild already. Finally, again, as my colleague mentioned, share and collaborate. Don't feel like you have to go this alone. Don't hesitate to reach out to your security partners. Reach out to Vandis. Reach out to Arctic Wolf. Seek additional points of context for your own approach and your own thought process. Your partners are here to help. If there are any questions, happy to take them at this time. Contact information up on the screen. And thank you for the time today.
Well, Jonathan, thank you. I don't believe we have any questions, and I do know that we're over. I do want to thank those who stayed to the end. Thank you for that. Obviously, the content was quite good, and so I think that's why certain individuals did stay. I really enjoyed this. So Shiriar and I would like to thank both you, Jonathan, for your presentation and Chris for his presentation on the state of cybersecurity. I also like to say thanks, Jeff, for your assistance today with our technical difficulties. We also would like to thank those of you who joined today's webinar. We hope you found the information insightful on how best to apply some best practices definitely identified by by Jonathan here today. For attending today, we'll actually send you that copy of the State of Cybersecurity report. We'll also send you a link to our interview with Chris Fielder on how he discusses Arctic Wolf's journey and mission to end cyber risk. And lastly, for those who attended today, we will be sending you a nice little lunch gift card. Thank you so much. Hopefully you'll get it in time for lunch. And visit our website, vandis.com/events, for other events you might be interested in, and or reach out at info@vandis.com if you have any additional questions. And that's it. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Stay safe out there.